Well, I knew I had to just wait long enough to see how guiding reproduction carefully is going to manifest in legislation. And sure enough, the whole Roe v. Wade and that being overturned was definitely out of left field. I wasn't expecting that. But then I remember all the things that I fought for in California when I was a liberal left-wing Democrat, and then transitioned to be an independent. And then I explored the libertarians, and then like the Ron Paul Revolution. Explored the right wing for a bit, the Christian right, the born agains, and all the different conspiracy, ascension, healing, all that world. And so then everything comes back to the Georgia Guidestones and the whole guiding reproduction carefully. I mean, that is not only at the macro level when it comes to children, but also at the micro level, guiding reproduction carefully, because that's a very broad statement. What does that mean? It means different things to different people. When you understand reproduction at the micro level, then you understand guiding that carefully will then also translate into creating more cures to close more systems and then cause the energy of the environment to cannibalize a closed system, which is a person who doesn't evolve or take in new information and keeps blocking it. Then you're guiding reproduction carefully at the macro level when it comes to the pregnancies, what unwanted or not, deformed children, okay. And then Roe v. Wade was giving access to family planning services and other types of stuff. And so, okay, we had that for many years. It's tied to the political arguments of women's rights and women's access to health care. Okay. Women do have access to health care as far as family planning. Well, not everything in a pregnancy will go the way as expected. Okay, but what about preventative? Well, there's plenty of alchemy to prevent unwanted pregnancies. But if you happen to get pregnant and it doesn't come out the right way, you know, that's a moral choice for a person, okay? And there are people that will say, I will bring that baby to term, and then somebody else will take it on. And we have so many people out there who will live between 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years that can take on somebody else's child that they didn't want to raise. And you can't get mad. That's the thing, is that we get mad at people who give up their children. We get mad at people who walk away from their children. And would you rather them be in a situation where they weren't taken care of properly, where they weren't in a loving household, in a household that would be, you know, balanced and accepting? And so that's, you know, where the whole JJ meta mentality is about taking your own personal responsibility. And if you can't, for whatever reason, because you were never taught that, or your hormones are out of control, or things were going on, then the system will step in and find a way to make sure that whatever choices you're faced with, they'll come in and help you navigate that minefield, because it is a minefield. And so, yeah, I was raised in a very left-wing household where it was all about women's rights, pro-choice, the whole, you know, equal rights amendment. I mean, I came from a very left-wing household. And I went out there and protested in the streets out there in San Francisco when Barbara Boxer was I don't know, she was senator at the time. And I had a sign that, you know, it was part of NOW, National Organization for Women. And I took a picture with Barbara Boxer. I don't know where it ended up, but I was out there doing that. And so, but now, I mean, now that I look at from both sides, I understand the right side, which is the mandates and people's access to choice. They don't like the mandates. People don't want, you know, that's my body, my choice. So the same thing with the pro-choice, my body, my choice. Okay, now you have both sides that are on the same wavelength. They understand where each other is coming from. So then now So now that you guys are on the same side, the left and the right, whether it's the mandates or it's the pro-choice, you're all about my body, my choice. Okay, so now where does it end up? Where do we end up? Now it ends up in personal responsibility, understanding, that we live in a society full of hormone triggers. We are raising children who are surrounded by reproductive triggers. The things that we practice in the hospitals, like circumcision and causing trauma, to then cause hypersexuality in boys and also girls, and then teaching our girls that they're only good for is to look good and to be sexually appealing, and then you wonder why we have such a rampant pregnancy rate and people having children that don't want it. I mean, and that's also where my book is going to come from, is that when you finally calm your hormones down, when you're able to get control of your hormones, and that's releasing those B cell and T cell memories that cause that hypersexuality, then you'll see a more balanced population where you don't have to go and step in and make a choice for somebody. But then this is also where the system needs to guide reproduction carefully and bring in things that they can help figure out how to make better or devise services. And it's all tied around capitalism, money, nation building, innovation, all of that. I mean, if we're not going to be using the fetal tissue from the Planned Parenthood for different scientific experiments, people are already giving up their DNA when they're going to the COVID-19 clinics and getting the swabs. When you're going to, DNA, was it DNA 123 or 123me or whatever it is, 23andMe, 23andMe, that's what it is, and you're giving up your DNA, there's no reason to have the abortion clinics. There's no reason to put a doctor in a position to keep taking away life. I mean, that must be doing something to the doctor. But what about the woman that needs to have, a chance to survive her getting rid of her? Well, that's going to be up to the community. When the Supreme Court, the highest court of the land, says, okay, we gave you a chance for many years to have Roe v. Wade, and then they overturn it because now we have very conservative judges in there. Now you have to understand what it's like to be on the other side of it. And what do we do with that? And so regardless, no matter what somebody does across the street from you, what somebody does in another country, what somebody does in another state, it really has no relevance to you, because you need to take care of your dog, your child, your husband, your wife, your family, the one that you are immediately in charge of, and you teach your kids and your husband or whatever. You teach whatever is under who's a dependent to you, not only to be personally responsible, but then maybe find a way to calm down their hormones so they don't end up wondering how they're going to navigate the minefield of their reproductive politics. Because that's what's going on, is that these kids are left with having to be faced with these choices of what they should or should not do when it comes to their reproductive rights. And it's easy to black and white say, well, you don't have sex if you don't want to get pregnant. That's not very easy it's not easy to say that to somebody. It's easy to say this, but it's not easy to practice, because when kids are so hormonally imbalanced and they have had trauma done to them at some point in time, you can't say to someone, well, don't have sex. And so what do you do? Well, that's the thing. It's not your problem. But it's our community. Now still, you can't legislate morals on someone else. Let the system do that. Okay? And then you find a way to teach your children not to fall into that category. What happens next door to you is really irrelevant. They're going to be faced with whatever political choices they have to make regarding their own life. And if people choose to do therapeutics or not, if people choose to undergo operations that are out of the country or across then people do what they do. But am I responsible for somebody else? Am I responsible for the guy next door? Am I responsible for someone over there, in Michigan that's going to cross Canadian lines to go and get procedures or drugs or whatever? I'm not responsible for my neighbor. I'll keep the infrastructure going to make sure that whatever choices are faced with, that they have access to whatever choices they are faced with. And still the person has to individually figure out how they're going to navigate, again, this political minefield. Because I can't make the decision for somebody else to do or not do something. At what point is the person responsible for their microbial reproduction or lack thereof? And that's what it comes down to. And so the Georgia Guidestones is a very broad tenet, bullet points of how would you interpret guiding reproduction carefully? How do you interpret that? There's so many ways to interpret that, but and so whatever legislation is being rolled out, it's all about guiding reproduction carefully. Because, on one hand, when you have now the right to lifers, right? But then we have so many people dying from COVID. We have so many people dying from cancer, disease, and chronic illness. We have so many people dying from drugs. Where is the balance of bringing in the life when so many people are dying? So somebody has to balance those scales. But if you don't have a bird's eye view of what is going on in a population level statistically, and you're so tunneled in one way, you got to realize what the system's trying to do is trying to balance itself out, even though you only see one tiny little part of it, compartmentalized part of it, your political part in it. When I finally realized both sides of the arguments, the left and the right, I played with the Trump, I played with the Biden, I played with the Ron Paul revolution, played with the conspiracy world, played with the essential world, played with the alien world. I played with all the different belief systems and with all the arguments. I was a proponent for this and I was an activist against that. I played both sides of the fence and I understand then both sides of why. And then you realize that then when the body gets cancer, it's because there's so much of a deficit somewhere else. There's so many T cells eating some part of the body that the body has to go and make up the difference. Well, that's kind of what's going on with Roe v. Wade having to be overturned. At some point, we have to make up the difference. And then science and innovation also is coming into play. And we're also getting DNA from people voluntarily when they're doing 23andMe and they're going to the COVID testing centers and giving up their DNA. Do we need to have these abortion clinics to then, because we've heard about that they're using some of those for science, and they're saying it's not true and that's all speculative. But I mean, what else? That's like a treasure trove of data when you have all the different fetuses that were taken from people's choices, from pro-choice. But now, do we need to practice that? It's pretty barbaric when you think about it. It's very barbaric. And so we have to leave the actual choice of ending a life to the system. And they will have to toss back and forth the ethics and morals around that, and everything is a case-by-case scenario. But where does the individual have the responsibility? And then who teaches that individual responsibility? Is it the parent? Is it the system? Is it the guardian? Is it the teachers? And that's the thing, is that since we don't know what goes on in each household with each specific person, we can't assume that we give them, this type of choice after the fact. And so education is a lot of preventative. Now, when you withhold information from someone, it's more exotic, right? When you tell someone not to do something, they want to do it, because when you tell them not to do it, they're going to be like, well, why? It's more exotic. They were going to do it. When you give people all the information, then it's not as exotic anymore. It's not as attractive, because now you know it. There's no mystery to it. And so that's the things the system is running up against is when do you give all the information, at what age and when, so that way you can mitigate certain behaviors before it happens. And that's still a very fine line. It's still very difficult to predict the outcome of any type of education or lack thereof when it comes to raising children, and also what you put into the school system. And then all the diversity and all the human bioengineering and everything else that goes along with that. And so then when it becomes that convoluted for one individual to figure out what the right choice is, then you say, you know what, I'm responsible for my kids, I'm responsible for my husband, my wife, my dog, my child, my whatever, and leave the rest up to the lawmakers who understand the bird's eye view of everything, and they understand that when our society is going a specific way, a transition, and people are dying left and right from COVID, then there's got to be a balance somewhere. And so you have to understand why the right is doing what they're doing, why they're overturning Roe v. Wade. Because they knew that with COVID and with all the people's reactions to COVID, there's going to be a massive amount of people dying. And we can't have people just ending pregnancies left and right because it just wasn't convenient for them at the time. Now we're like, what are you chasing after? I could see why a couple of years ago, 5 or 10 years ago, where people were getting abortions because they wanted to get into their career. They were part of Facebook and Google, and if they had a baby, you take away the talent pool, and not contribute to the advancement of humankind. So then, when we don't need as many advanced humans out there, out in the workforce, whether it's men or women or whatever, then you're like, okay, now we need to bring in more bodies so then we can edify them to now the advancements that have already been put in place, that Mark Zuckerberg, Priscilla Chan, Bezos, whatever, now we can bring in humans, whatever form they're in. And they could be autistic, they could be Down syndrome, they could be whatever, missing certain things. And advancements of science will then make up the difference somewhere. And then at some point, they will figure out their place in this world. And we will still have a population that is viable and will be at different levels of decline or different levels of capabilities. And again, who am I to say what is right and wrong? But I just take care of me, take care of my husband, take care of my dog, take care of my property, pay my taxes, be an amiable, polite human being out there in the public. I'll take in new information if it's appropriate. And I could care less what a person does next door as long as if they're not encroaching upon my world and they're not ramming their politics down my throat and they're not breaking the law. I don't care what people do. And that's the thing, that's the stance we must take, because we don't have the bigger picture. We don't know why things are happening the way they're happening unless you want to know and want to understand both sides of an argument. And so it took me 10, 15 years to figure out both sides of the argument. But yeah, the whole overturning Roe v. Wade really threw me for a loop for a minute. And I'm like, what? And then I realized, yeah, when you're seeing your friends and family drop like flies, and you're seeing people going out getting abortions, where's the infrastructure? Where's the infrastructure if we're not going to have a population coming in to replace those that are dying? Okay, so the system knows what they need to do, and that's why I don't vote, because it doesn't matter either end. The system knows that you have two sides of the same coin. One is going to be coming in and doing this. The other ones are coming. That's why you have the balance of power in the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch. So that way, if things become too out of balance, and there's another one to come in and keep the balance. So I get it. Do I love the politics around it? Do I love the fact that people clash because of it? No, but that's necessary. But then you have the choice to take part in the war or take yourself out of it and understand why it has to happen and figure out how you're going to still be part of it without succumbing to the energy, as well as, you not cannibalizing somebody else. That you still give people choices and opportunities and give them the freedom to do what they got to do. And that's a hard thing, because when you have such a political stance against or for something, it's hard to see the other point of view. But eventually you're going to have to, or you will be cannibalized by your politics, your religion, and your scientific dogmas. And so that's the New World Order, is understanding now balance of both sides. And so if they're overturning Roe v. Wade, it's because COVID is kicking everybody's ass. And we can't afford to have so many abortions. And that people are going to have to take preventative. If you don't want a kid, then take a plan B if you happen to have sex and the condom broke or something. Take some kind of whatever FDA approved, anti-pregnancy pill, if that is what you have to do. I mean, I'm not for pills. I'm not for any of that stuff. But remember, we all have choices. Since I am married and I have sex, I will, if I get pregnant, I'm going to keep it. There's no sense in me not keeping it. I have all the means to take care of it. Okay. And even if I have to integrate with my medical institution for whatever reason for a certain amount of time, I'll do it. I'm not going to be like, oh no, I'm not going to do that. And I know how to balance out both sides of the microbial arguments when it comes to the medical system and newborns and all that. And I know what needs to happen. I know how to play the game of balancing out inflammation and cures and eventually allowing things and knowing how my kid's going to have to be raised in a society such as this that is so dynamic, full of disease. Okay? Do I want to bring a kid into this world like that? No, but if it happens, it happens. It won't happen. But what I'm saying is if you don't want to get pregnant, then there's ways and means to do that. Okay? And if you do get pregnant, however it comes out, that's how the system is going to determine whether or not what you choose is lawful. And again, you could say my body, my choice, but whenever you have sex, whenever you get pregnant, it's always a risk. Always. And if you know your predispositions, you know you have a lot of issues, and you still want to get pregnant, chances are there's something going on with that baby. You're taking that risk. You can't just say, well, I have a baby now and I don't like the way it turned out, so I want to give it back. No, you can't give it back, but you can bring it to term and give it to someone who will do something with it if you can't. But what about the life of the mother? Well, she wanted to get pregnant. If it's really life-threatening, then yeah, obviously the medical system will have to make their determination based upon the laws of the time. Okay? But that's still somebody else's situation. When you're faced with that situation, you will figure out what the best case scenario is. And there will be plenty of choices for you. Okay? And that's the thing about it, is that there's plenty of choices. And yeah, I know the arguments of, well, if she's 16 and she got, raped by somebody, then what do you do? Well, again, that'll be left up to the family. But what happens if the family is abusive, wants her to have a kid? Well, then she'll have to go and talk to a social worker and plead her case. If she doesn't have the capacity, the articulation to do that, then, there's so many what ifs. But when someone is a 16 and they get pregnant and they want to have a place to go and terminate it, there's already issues going on in that family no matter what. You couldn't save that kid if you wanted to. That kid, that family, that whole situation has to let itself play out. And the system has to be the one to step in and make the choice. What's best for that child, and then how the family is going to figure out their place in it. And it's not always pretty, let me tell you. I've read all the stories. I've read the Oprah books about girls in right-wing households where they get pregnant and then they get ostracized and they're forced to go have the pregnancy to term and all that. And I was just like, okay, I read the bleeding heart stories on that. I was raised in that, okay? And there's also the other side of it, and it's up to the government to figure out how they're going to control population incline and population decline, and balancing out, knowing the future, knowing what we need to have, what kind of resources we need to have as far as the population in the future and today. And there's a lot that the government has to go and look at. It's not just, they put in a law and they're just arbitrary. Oh, there's reasons behind the laws. There's reasons behind everything they're doing, but you have to make yourself understand the reasons behind it. It'll be jolting if you're raised with trying to protest against something because of your rights and or whatever, or lack thereof. But again, there's reasons why everything happens. There's a reason, and just understand the reasons. All right, bye.